Stop. Not the video, stop the thing you've been doing with your life for the last 3 years. That quiet arrangement you made with yourself. The one where you decided that this is probably it. That the calling was real once, back when you were younger and your faith had teeth. But that somewhere along the way, it downgraded into a feeling you have on Sunday mornings and forget by Monday lunch. Chosen one, I need you to hear me clearly, because I'm not going to soften this. You have been living like nothing is changing, and everything is already changing. You just haven't been shown the blueprint yet. There's a difference between a world that isn't moving and a world that's moving underneath you while you stand still. And I think if you're honest, you've suspected the second one for a while now. That's why you clicked. Not because the title was loud, but because something in you has been restless in a way you can't trace to any specific problem. Your bills are handled. Your family's fine. Nobody died. And still there's this pressure in your chest like a storm sitting 3 counties away, and you keep checking the sky, and the sky keeps looking normal. That pressure is not anxiety. That's discernment with nowhere to go yet. I want to talk to you today about the world that's coming. Not the one on the news. Not the one the algorithms are arguing about. The one heaven has been quietly assembling while you were convinced your life had flatlined. Because there's a lie you've swallowed. And I want to name it right now. In the first minute, before we go anywhere else. The lie is this: nothing is happening because nothing is visible. That lie has cost more callings than open sin ever has. It doesn't come at you loud. It comes at you as reasonableness, as maturity. As well, I'm just being realistic, and it settles into a believer the way rust settles into a truck, left in a field slow, silent, and by the time you notice it, the frame's already going. So let me be the voice that interrupts it. Think about your last few years for a second. Really think. Not the highlight version you'd give at a small group, and not the complaint version you'd give a close friend at 11 at night. The actual version. You've been getting up. You've been showing up. You clock in at the warehouse or the school or the clinic. You handle the shift. You come home. You eat something you didn't fully taste. You scroll for 40 minutes you'll never get back. You pray a prayer that feels like it's bouncing off the ceiling fan. And you do it again. And on the surface, the whole thing looks like a loop. Same parking lot. Same Kroger run on Thursday. Same 3 routes between home and work and church. Same conversation with your mother where she asks if you've thought any more about that thing you were going to do. And that's where the enemy gets you. Not with temptation, with monotony. Because monotony convinces you that the calling was a phase. It whispers that anointed people have visible lives books, platforms, doors swinging open, testimony after testimony. And you look at your Tuesday and you think, well, clearly that's not me. Clearly I misread it. Clearly what I felt at 17, or 24, or in that hospital hallway when God met you in a way you've never been able to explain to anyone. Clearly that was just emotion. But here's what most people miss, and I need you to sit with it. In Scripture, the longest stretches of God's greatest work almost never look like work. They look like waiting. They look like ordinary labor in an unremarkable place. They look like a man doing the same thing every day for decades, while the people around him decide he's lost his mind. Which brings me to a man who spent 100 years building for a world that did not exist yet. You know the name. Noah. But I don't think you've ever really sat inside his Tuesdays. Understand the setup. God speaks to one man about a shift so total that the entire framework of life on the earth would be reorganized. And then God gives him what? A vision board? A launch date with a countdown? No. He gives him measurements. Cubits. Wood type. Pitch inside and out. A door on the side. 3 decks. A window near the top. He gives him a construction project, and Noah goes out and starts building a boat in a place where there is no sea. Picture the neighbors. Because there were neighbors. This wasn't a man alone on an island, there was a culture around him. Markets, weddings, gossip, people going about their business exactly as they always had. And here's this man, hauling timber every single morning, year after year, for a flood nobody had ever seen, because rain like that had never fallen. Do you understand how insane he looked? Not eccentric. Insane. He wasn't building a shed. He was building something so large it dominated the horizon. Every person in that region had to look at that thing every single day and make a decision about what kind of man Noah was. And they made it. Over and over, for 100 years. And here's the part that should wreck you a little. For those 100 years, nothing changed. The sky stayed the same. The seasons rolled. The kids grew up, got married, had kids of their own, who also grew up hearing about the crazy old man and his boat. There was no partial flood, no warning drizzle, no sign at year 40 that said you're on the right track, keep going. Nothing, just wood and pitch and one more day, and a promise he could not verify. That is the exact place where you are living right now. You're building something you can't see the water for. And every day the sky stays clear, feels like evidence against you. But listen, the flood was already decided. It was already coming. Every single day Noah swung a hammer into what looked like empty air. The coming world was closer than the day before. The delay was never absence. The delay was construction time. God wasn't withholding the shift. God was making sure that when it came, there was a vessel ready to carry what mattered through it. You've been calling this season stuck. Heaven has been calling it framing, and I want to tell you what the ark really was, because most people think it was a rescue. It wasn't only a rescue, it was continuity. That boat was how the old world got carried into the new one. Everything that would seed the world on the other side, the family, the animals, the covenant, the future. Every bit of it passed through the thing Noah built. During the years, he had nothing to show for it. So when you feel useless right now, when you feel like your gifts are in storage, and your best years are being spent on nothing, hear this. You may be the continuity. You may be the vessel God is building, so that when the shift lands, somebody survives it inside you. Your sobriety, your marriage that you fought for, your prayer life that nobody claps for, your patience with a difficult parent. Those aren't consolation prizes for a calling that didn't happen. Those are hull boards. Now let's talk about the world that's coming. And let me be careful here, because I don't traffic in fear, and I don't set dates. You've seen the numbers thrown around. 4 billion. Some version of a great sorting, a great shaking, a great reduction. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend I have a calendar heaven didn't give me. Anyone who tells you the day is selling you something. Jesus himself said no man knows, but here's what I will say, and I'll say it plainly. Every serious move of God in Scripture involved a narrowing before it involved a multiplying. Gideon started with 32,000, and God took him down to 300, not because God is stingy, but because a crowd would have stolen the testimony. Elijah thought he was the last one standing, and God told him there were 7,000 he'd never met who hadn't bent the knee. A remnant is not a small failure. A remnant is a concentrated purpose. So when you hear about a coming world, don't picture a head count. Picture a sifting. Picture the difference between people who were near the fire and people who were actually holding something in it. Because a shift doesn't create your character, it reveals it. Pressure doesn't build the vessel. Pressure finds out whether the vessel was built. And that's the whole reason this matters today, while the sky is still clear. The people who will carry others through what's coming are not being formed in the middle of it. They're being formed right now, in the boring part, in the years that feel wasted, in the shift work, and the caregiving, and the long obedience with no applause. God is not going to hand you a role in the new world that your current character couldn't hold. He never has. Not once. And I want to make this concrete, because I think the coming world sounds like something happening on a screen somewhere far away. And it isn't. Let me tell you what it actually looks like when a shift lands on ordinary people. It looks like a woman in Ohio getting a phone call at 2 in the morning about her brother, and being the only person in that family who knows how to pray without falling apart. It looks like a man in a truck outside a Home Depot at 6 a.m., getting a text from a guy he barely knows who's about to lose his marriage, and being the one steady voice that man has. It looks like a nurse on a night shift, standing in a hallway with a family that just got the worst news of their lives, and having something real to say because she has already walked through a valley of her own and did not come out hollow. That's the shift. That's what it looks like on the ground. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives as somebody else's emergency landing in your ordinary week. And in that moment, one of two things is true about you. Either there's something in you that's been built: depth, steadiness, a prayer life with roots, or there isn't. And you find out in the worst possible way that you've been running on borrowed confidence. I've watched both. I've watched people with big personalities and loud faith go completely silent when the weight came. Because volume isn't the same thing as structure, and I've watched quiet people nobody would have picked. People who'd been faithful in a small church in a small town for 20 years with no recognition, carry an entire family through a season that should have destroyed all of them. The difference was never gifting. The difference was what got built during the years when nothing was happening. So let me ask you the uncomfortable question, and I want you to actually answer it in your own head. If somebody knocked on your door tonight, right now, at the end of a normal Tuesday, and said, "I have nothing left, and I don't know where else to go," what would you have to give them? Not what would you say, what would you have? Because you can't give somebody a piece you've only read about. You can't hand somebody a faith you've been outsourcing to a worship playlist. Whatever is actually in you is what comes out under pressure, and pressure does not do inventory in advance. It just arrives. That's why the boring years matter so much. That's why God is not in a hurry with you the way you're in a hurry with yourself. He is not trying to get you to a platform. He is trying to get something into you that will hold when it's needed, and that kind of thing only forms slowly, in the dark, without applause. Now let me tell you something about myself. Because I think you've earned it, and because I don't want you hearing this from a stranger. My name is George, and I lost about 6 years of my life to the exact lie I just described to you. I'm not talking about backsliding. I wish it were that dramatic. At least backsliding has a testimony arc. What happened to me was quieter and, honestly, more embarrassing. I just agreed. I agreed that the thing God put in me when I was young was probably a personality trait I'd mistaken for a call. I stayed in church. I served. I was the guy you could count on to show up early and stack chairs. And inside, I had made a settlement with God that I never said out loud. I'll keep believing in you if you stop bringing that up. 6 years of that. I remember the exact night it broke. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot after a service, and I had this thought: I'm getting really good at surviving a life I wasn't supposed to be living. And it hit me that I hadn't stopped believing in God. I'd stopped believing He was still working. Those are different sicknesses. And the second one is harder to spot because it wears a Christian smile. What changed wasn't circumstances. Nothing in my situation moved for another year and a half. What changed was that I stopped reading the silence as a verdict. And when I finally went back and studied how God actually works with people, He sets apart the patterns, the sequences, the specific things that repeat across every single one of their stories. I found something I wasn't prepared for. There was an order to it. There were markers. Things that showed up in Scripture again and again in the lives of set-apart people, and things I had lived through myself without knowing what I was inside of. That's what became the secret protocol. What you just experienced was not content. It was a mirror. And mirrors demand a decision. If you are ready to go to the root to finally understand why you think, feel, and perceive differently from everyone around you, the secret protocol carries the 7 keys that reveal what God placed inside you before you ever drew your first breath. Full audiobook included for every moment of your day. Plus, the awakening map. As a bonus, the 5 stages of spiritual awakening mapped with clarity, showing where you are right now and what the Spirit is releasing in this season. Link pinned in the first comment. Not for much longer. And you did not make it to the end without a reason. Now stay with me, because there's a man I need you to meet. And he waited longer than almost anyone in the Bible. His name was Caleb. Here's what most people know. He was one of the 12 spies, one of the 2 who came back with a good report. Here's what most people never sit with. He was 40 years old when he stood in front of a nation and said, "We are well able to take it." And they didn't listen. Think about what that did to him. He was right. He was standing in the truth. He had seen the land with his own eyes. He had tasted the fruit. He knew what God had said, and the crowd voted for fear. And because they voted for fear, Caleb, who had done nothing wrong, spent the next 40 years walking in circles in a desert with people who had disqualified themselves. Let me say that again, because some of you are living in it. Caleb served a sentence he did not earn. He watched an entire generation die off around him. Funeral after funeral, year after year, sand and tents and the same complaints from the same mouths, and every one of those days was a day he could have spent in the land he had already been promised. Nobody would have blamed him for going bitter, or for deciding that God's promises come with an expiration date, and his had quietly passed. And then he shows up at 85 years old, and he says something that I think is one of the most defiant sentences in all of Scripture. He says, "I am as strong today as I was the day Moses sent me. My strength for war is the same now as it was then." And then this is the part he says, "Give me this mountain." Not give me a corner. Not give me something manageable at my age. Give me the mountain, the hill country. The part with the giants still on it. The hardest assignment on the map, requested by an 85-year-old man who had been waiting 45 years for a promise everybody else had let go of. Where did that strength come from? I'll tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't sitting there fully formed at 40 and getting preserved like something in a jar. That strength was built in the wilderness. Every year he kept believing while nothing changed. Something in him got denser. The waiting didn't drain Caleb. The waiting made him load-bearing. That's what you can't see happening in yourself right now. You think these years have been eroding you, losing time, losing edge, losing whatever it was that made you special, back when you still had the energy for it. But if you have kept believing through a stretch where absolutely nothing confirmed you chosen one, you have been getting stronger, not weaker. You've been getting stronger in a way that only shows up under weight, and that's exactly why it's invisible right now. Nobody has put weight on it yet. The coming world will put weight on it. Now hear the other thing about Caleb, because this is the piece almost nobody preaches. Scripture says over and over that he had a different spirit in him, and that he wholly followed the Lord. Not partly, wholly. And during those 45 years, holy following didn't look like conquest. It looked like showing up to a life he hadn't chosen without letting his heart go cold toward the one who allowed it. That's the test you're actually in. Not whether you can endure the delay, whether you can endure it without going hard inside. Because there are two kinds of people who survive long waits. One comes out sharp and dangerous capable, but rusted through with resentment, ready to take a mountain for their own vindication. The other comes out asking for the mountain because there are still giants on it, and somebody has to go. God gives mountains to the second kind. Let me bring you a woman now, because I don't want you thinking this is only about men swinging hammers and asking for hill country. Deborah sat under a palm tree. That's how Scripture introduces her. Not on a battlefield, not in a palace, under a specific tree between two towns, and the people came up to her for judgment. That's it. That was her whole visible life for years, sitting in one spot, settling disputes, listening to arguments about land and livestock and family debts, telling people the truth in a nation that was under the boot of an oppressor, and had been for 20 years. 20 years of that. Every day the same tree. And I guarantee you there were mornings she walked out to that palm and thought, this is a strange way to use a prophet. But do you understand what was actually being built under that tree? Trust, reputation, discernment, sharpened on 10,000 small human problems. By the time the moment came, there wasn't a person in Israel who doubted what she said, because she'd been saying true things in that same spot for 2 decades. And then one day she sends for a man named Barak, and everything is different. She tells him, God has already given the command, go. Take 10,000 men, and I will draw out the enemy commander and his 900 iron chariots and deliver him into your hand. Notice something. The command was already given. God had spoken it before that morning. The instruction had been sitting there, waiting for the moment when there'd be somebody credible enough to deliver it, and somebody willing enough to move on it. Barak's answer is the most human line in the chapter. He says, if you go with me, I'll go. If you won't go, I'm not going. And she goes. That woman got up from the tree she'd been sitting under for 20 years and walked onto a battlefield. You need to see the whole shape of that. The years under the palm weren't a holding pattern before her real assignment. They were the reason she could do her real assignment. If she hadn't been sitting there being faithful in the small and unremarkable, there'd have been no authority when the moment came. Nobody follows a stranger into a war. So what's your palm tree? Where's the place you've been faithful that feels too small to matter? The Sunday school class of 6 kids. The elderly neighbor you check on. The job where you're the only one who won't lie on the report. The recovery meeting you've been going to for 4 years, where you mostly just listen. That's not your holding cell. That's your credentialing. And one more, quickly, because this one is for the person watching who thinks they're too far gone to be part of anything that's coming. There was a man named Onesimus. He was a slave who ran from his master, and by the standards of his world he was a criminal with no future. His name, and I love that God let this detail into the record, his name meant useful, which had to have felt like a joke every day of his life. And this runaway ends up in the same city as Paul, in prison, and gets saved. And Paul writes a letter and sends the man back, but not his property. He writes, he was useless to you before, but now he is useful to both of us. Receive him as you would receive me. Receive him as a brother. A runaway became a letter carrier for scripture. We're still reading 2,000 years later. You are not disqualified by the wasted years. The wasted years are the material. God has never once in the history of his dealings with people required a clean start. He requires a turned face. So let me land this where it belongs. Stop living like nothing's changing, not because you should manufacture excitement, and not because you need to go make something happen out of anxiety. Stop it, because it's not true. The sky being clear over Noah's head was not evidence about the flood. The desert around Caleb was not evidence about the mountain. The palm tree over Deborah was not evidence about the battle. And the ordinary Tuesday you're in right now is not evidence about what God is assembling. What you do with the clear sky years is what you'll be carrying when the sky changes. So build. Keep praying the prayers that bounce off the ceiling fan. Keep your word when nobody's auditing it. And keep showing up to the small faithful thing nobody has ever thanked you for. You're not treading water. You're framing a hull. And when the shift comes, and something in you already knows it's coming, which is why you've been restless, without a reason you will not be scrambling to become someone. You'll already be the person somebody else climbs into for safety. Here's what I want from you before you go. And I want you to be specific with me. Tell me the year your waiting started. Just the year. And then tell me one thing you have kept doing anyway. One small, faithful, unglamorous thing you never stopped, even when it felt pointless. Not the big dream. The little board you've been nailing in the same place with no water in sight. Put the year first, then the thing. I read these, and I want to see how many of you have been building longer than you realized. And remember, everything I spoke about goes deeper inside the secret protocol, pinned in the first comment. The 7 keys, the audiobook, and the awakening map are there waiting for you whenever you're ready to take the next step.